Welcome back to another episode of the Bear Trap on the Boomer Bust channel, a Bears podcast by a Bears fan. I'm your host, Terry, and today I'm going to talk about some hot takes revolving around the Bears. Not traditional hot takes as in saying something controversial just to do it, but some that I actually believe that might not be popular. And then we're going to wrap it up with taking one of our questions from the fan line. So, my first hot take, let's kick it off. Ryan Poles pulled the greatest okie doke over the Bears fan. And I don't mean the greatest in history, but maybe one of the best in our time. And I say that because I hear people talking right now over and over again, especially as you got, towards the end of the season. Will we keep Eberflus? Will we keep both? And it again, it's funny. It's funny that we kind of circle back to these same conversations like it's deja vu. We did this before, but we had these conversations. Is it Eberflus? Is it Poles? Is it both? Who's coming back? Whatever. So everybody's trying to make their case for whatever they believe. And in that, I hear a lot of praise for Poles. One of the things I hear on Twitter, or I see on Twitter, here on the radio, see in comments, I see a lot, is I'm going to trust Poles, whatever he decides with the quarterback, because he showed that he could build this roster, or he improved the roster. So a couple things that very, very, very clear. I am not saying he can't build a roster. I'm not saying he hasn't improved the roster. I'm not saying he doesn't know how to evaluate talent. Not saying any of that. However, the claim that you make is it's clear that Poles knows how to do this, so that's why I trust him. Everybody's missing the fact that the reason that the roster improves so much, or that we improve, is because he gave you the most bare bones roster to start off with. He pulled a okie doke. He pulled, what is it called? The wool over the sheep eyes or something like that. I don't know. But he pulled a okie doke on Bears fans, because you have the casuals just die hard and representing Poles. Not everybody, but a lot of them. And I'm sitting there like, you do realize he's the reason the roster was so bad. Like, if you want to look at the last season of the Pace Nagy era and say we weren't great, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. But to act like, well, Poles inherited this terrible roster and that's why the team was so bad. No, he inherited a roster that he then gutted and didn't even attempt to build up, and we had a terrible roster. So many people are going to say, well, that was the plan, we were tanking. If you want to go to trust the process route, which is fine, that was the plan, and it clearly worked. We were terrible. We got in position, the best position was number one. We already had a quarterback, so we were able to trade that, blah, blah, blah. And that's the gift that keeps on giving, because we're in that situation again. He's a genius. I'm not saying that because he didn't know it was going to work out that way. But B, that has nothing to do with the roster. Just because you are a fan of the philosophy and the plan, and you said, as I sit here today, Ryan Poles' plan to gut the roster, tank, get resources, cap space worked. That does not mean he improved the roster from year one to year two with some magic. Like, the bar was set so low that we almost had no choice but to improve. And I say almost because you could screw it up theoretically. But in my mind, if you purposefully put out bad talent, you know it's bad talent. So you know you're getting better talent the next year. So people throw out all the moves and everything, and they say, look at this, this is evidence, this is evidence. And to me, again, we could talk about the individual moves and all that, but at the end of the day, people are praising him for building up a terrible roster that he created. And I said that before the season started. And we had all types of people that want to argue. And then I get it. Some of y'all optimistic and you just see rose-colored glasses. That's fine. But there's no debate. And I'm sure there's some people that will now. At the time, there was a lot of debate. We're not tanking. What are you talking? You don't know what you're talking about. He said we're playing for the playoffs. We clearly, no, the roster's good. No, because we got this guy. He's hungry and he's cheap. No, he was tanking. And there's probably some people today that still want to argue that. The writing is on the wall. I'm not going to go through everything. I was going to try to look at the roster, talk about all his moves and all that. But the highlights are the highlights. One of the highlights is he gutted this roster. I don't care what you say. He got EQ St. Brown, Byron Pringle, Velus Jones was a rookie. And I don't even remember who else. But you was not trying to improve the receiving core, which is one of the biggest outliers. Then the offensive line, you start Braxton Jones, which they did a good job with, but still, you put a 5th-round rookie out there to the fire, starting left tackle. And then you bring in Lucas Patrick, who everybody told me was the savior. And no, I knew he was not that. And so you got that. You got Larry Borum out there. You got Alex Leatherwood, who was a top pick that his team didn't want. You got Riley Reef, who has been bad his whole career. It was just very clear they're tanking, and some people didn't want to believe it. Then, of course, you start getting rid of people. You get rid of Khalil Mack, the one edge presence you got. You get rid of Robert Quinn eventually. Akeem Hicks, Bilal Nichols, all those guys. You bring in no defensive tackle presence besides Justin Jones. He was great with the Chargers splitting double teams. I love that part. But you bring in no presence on the D-line, and you put out 2 rookie secondary players who, again, I don't have no issue with that. And well, at least Brisker did well. I'm not going to say Kyler Gordon did well. But that's fine. That's what you drafted them for. But you throw them out there. You get no real help at the other corner. You purposefully tanked. And so then people are now turning around and praising him for building up a roster that was bare bones. You had no choice but to go up. And so I just think it was a complete okie doke. Like, again, the philosophy to build the roster up with assets and all that, that's one thing. But to get the bonus of the benefit of the doubt because people think you could build a roster just because you had a terrible roster, and then you went out the next year after you got all the assets and the money, then you actually spent money on people with actual talent that you know are talented, instead of just giving out a bunch of cheap contracts to people that you know weren't good. And then, yeah, of course we improved. So there, I just find it funny that while a lot of people are saying Ryan Poles is great and all that, and again, I'm not saying he's not, or I don't really have a full judgment on him, but I'm definitely not how some of these people are, where it's just like what they call him, King Poles and all that. I'm just like, that's hilarious that y'all think that. Because he pretty much pulled the okie doke on y'all. And, just thinking about some of the highlights again, like he traded Roquan, basically said the position's not valuable enough. And then he went and got Chase Claypool, who then turned around and is not on the team and not starting for the team that he went to. You bring in, we got DJ Moore. That's fine. We already knew he was established. But that was part of just having the number 1 pick, which was really out of our control at the end of the day. But we got it. You flipped it. Cool. And you got this pick this year. Again, Panthers were the worst team in the league. Out of our control, nothing to do with us. So now we got the number 1 pick again. So we're able to, we're in position to do these things. But Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to stay in that situation. 1-2 years fine, but that's not the goal. The goal is not in the NBA to have 15 first round picks in the next 3 years. The goal in the NFL is not to pick number one back to back, no matter how you do it. That's just not what it is. So we'll continue to see. Again, I was thinking about diving into all his stuff, but we're not gonna do that. All right, moving on. Hot take number 2, which I think is the hottest take. There seems to be a foregone conclusion that we need a second receiver. Now, I can go into a whole lot of deep discussion about this, but I'm going to say very basically, another receiver is not our biggest issue. And the other thing that I'll say is that we have a really good number 2 receiver. And so I don't understand that. Now, I'm going to start with that. Darnell Mooney has gotten, I don't understand. He has gotten some serious, I wouldn't say disrespect, because that's kind of like internet talk at this point. But he's definitely been overlooked seriously, and I don't understand. So we're going to talk about the offense not being great. We're going to talk about potentially not bringing Justin Fields back. We're going to talk about how some people believe the offensive coordinator was so terrible and all these different discussions. But then we're going to make it seem like it's Darnell Mooney's fault that he didn't have production. And so that doesn't fly with me. I mean, at the end of the day, production isn't the only evaluation, and obviously you know that if you listen to me. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, he didn't put up these numbers, so he sucks. Just like Kmet. People were saying the exact same thing about Kmet before they started giving him the ball. You are a receiver. You cannot throw yourself the ball. You can't make those decisions. So I just don't understand. Like, if you're on one side, that's fine, but you can't say both things at the same time. You can't say the offense was bad. You can't say the quarterback was limited. And you can't say the receiver is his fault for not producing. You can't do all of those. And so it might be a little bit of both, but all of those is not 100% true. So to me, DJ Moore, people are going to say, well, he put up numbers. That's because you force fed him. And it still wasn't enough. Well, we didn't use DJ Moore correctly. You force fed that man with like they do with any receiver in college, and they do a lot in the NFL. They're going to throw a bunch of screen passes, a bunch of stuff designed to get you something short, run with the ball after, because that's what you're good at. Okay, cool. Mooney, I think, is, anybody that's fast is going to, be straight as far as yak, but that's not his number one gig. And so somebody that really stood out as a target in the middle of the mess before this year and, any of that. And then somebody that has shown you that he can make incredible plays. I don't understand what the discussion is. Like, Darnell Mooney, and I said it from his rookie year, he's an excellent number 2. Now, do I think he's a number 1 necessarily? No, I don't. And that's a different discussion. That's kind of tough to even tell you what that is. But what I do know is how to evaluate players. You talk about the physical trait, the speed, his route running, the insane catches he's made that I never thought he would be able to make. And again, I didn't evaluate him coming out of college. I believe that was the COVID year, but I didn't evaluate him coming out of college. But watch him in the NFL, there's no discussion that he has the physical traits. So as I said before this year and during this year, if they traded him to the Chiefs, you really think he wouldn't be able to produce? If they would have traded him to the Buffalo Bills, you don't think he's producing? You don't think he's producing on the 49ers? Y'all got to stop. it's one thing to say he didn't have numbers, okay, but then you got to have the rest of the conversation that provides the context. You can't just leave it at that to make it seem like he's not good. Like the people I've seen that are talking about moving on from Mooney, not bringing him back, or they just talking about we need number 2 receiver. Man, imagine what it could be like if we had a number 2. Imagine if we had another target. We had another target. For as many games as he was available, we had another target. And so are you really sitting here trying to make it seem like it's his fault? Oh, yeah, but he's not one of these draft picks. Okay, I might agree. He might not be the caliber receiver they are, but that doesn't mean he wasn't productive because he wasn't that caliber receiver. How many times have we seen receivers be productive in one place and nothing in another place? To put it in the terms for some of you gamers out there that enjoy, think of Madden. Madden always tells you, here's the overall. I trade him to this team, same overall. That's not how it works. If it was true, you have a baseline overall designed on what I always tell you, physical traits, technique, IQ. But then you would have a huge boost. You would have a 5 to 20 overall point boost depending on what scheme you go to, because that's what's gonna matter. So I don't want to hear it. If you put Nathan Peterman out there and then you give him DJ Moore, Justin Jefferson, they're not going to produce the same as if you put Pat Mahomes out there. That's just what it is. So to sit here and act like Darnell Mooney can't play is insane. It's absolutely insane. And so, you know, outside of the rest of the conversation, Darnell Mooney is a absolutely great receiver in the NFL. And because we haven't unlocked that, and he hasn't had the quarterback to help him do that, to blame him and penalize him is crazy. You really think DJ Moore still put up stats this year? You think DJ Moore putting up stats if they weren't purposefully trying to get him the ball? How do you think a receiver puts up any production if somebody's not looking for them? If somebody's not calling plays for them? I don't understand what you think a receiver is going to do. Jump out 20 feet in the air and snatch the ball from whoever's about to catch it? No, that's not how it works. You have to be involved in the game. Just like the same way in basketball. You can be like, oh, this guy was a good 3-point shooter, but this season he sucks. But nobody's passed him the ball. Nobody's put him in the rotation of in the play. He's not an option in the play. So now he can't play because he's not being involved. And they say it all the time, well, you can be good, you just got to involve him. You got to involve him in the play. The same thing with football. So anyway, I'm going to stop because I'm going to go off on that. The second thing, the other part of that is, even if you agree that Mooney's not good, which is crazy, I still don't agree that a second receiver is our biggest issue. Number one, we know it's the quarterback, but everybody's saying outside that, receiver is the biggest issue. Number one, I don't know why people think all of a sudden that you have to have 2 receivers. I mean, you have the Kansas City Chiefs, again, albeit the greatest quarterback we've seen, playing with no true number 1 and a rookie receiver that's emerged, who I really loved in the draft process, by the way, and I said we should have drafted him. But anyway, he's emerging, but you don't have a top 10, you don't have no 2 top 10, you don't have 2 top 50 receivers. 50 might be harsh, but still. And then you got the 49ers. For as much as people like to talk about him in this elite, arena, Debo's not a top 10 receiver. He's not an elite receiver. Brandon Ayuk, absolutely rocket development. Great. Probably top 20, him and Debo. Not a top 10 receiver. They both in the Super Bowl. One has the greatest quarterback of all time, yes, but also one also has a Mr. Irrelevant. You don't need two great receivers to win. Who told y'all that? And so that line of thinking in my mind comes from Justin Fields. Justin needs everything. Justin needs three great receivers, a great tight end, and a top 10 O-line and a top 10 defense, and then he'll be great. And I'm not even trying to knock Justin Fields, but I think it's just the Fields people that are doing that. I think that's where that comes from. I don't know where this talk of receiver is. Like, I hear it everywhere. Like I said, national TV, mock drafts, everywhere. The Bears need receiver help. We need quarterback help. We need offense help. To me, the number one priority as our roster, again, outside of figuring out who the quarterback is either interior offensive line or interior defensive line. We need a 3-tech. Those don't grow on trees. Those are not easy to find. I could count on one hand the impact 3 techniques in the league. So I'm not saying that's easy, but that's the number one. Montez Sweat is a nice get. He's not elite. So even if he was, you still need multiple areas on the D-line to attack. And so a 3 technique would probably have the biggest impact. Won't say this, I mean, it's up there as a need, but D-line is probably the biggest need. Whether that's another edge player that's legit or a 3-tech. That's probably the biggest need. And then you're talking about a center and guard. And so I look at those way before I look at a receiver. And then to be honest, after that, I'm probably looking at a safety or nickel after I look at the O-line, D-line. And then I might look at a receiver. And I ain't saying obviously it's bad to have another receiver. But when you look at the roster, that's not the number one priority, and I do not understand why that has become the conversation. I wouldn't say you can't. You could try, but I doubt you could show me on tape the reasoning for it. Again, Mooney healthy. First of all, because Mooney hasn't produced, much like a Justin Fields, you have the option of bringing him back long term at a much cheaper rate than you might typically would. It won't be as cheap as a rookie, but you could bring him in at a cheaper rate. The only thing is with a rookie, yeah, it's cheaper, but you're giving up the position to draft somebody else. And so if you're talking about a true number 2, you already got one in Mooney. Because this is not football of old where, okay, we have one at the X, one at the Z. No. Your number 1 could be wherever you want him to be. You could move him from play to play, which means the same thing about your number 2. So if you think he can't play on the outside, which is crazy because he can, then you could absolutely make him a full-time slot if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. It's about the targets. And so, again, you got a number 2. And if you just, we're not bringing him back, I don't care no matter what you got to say then, my answer would still be we don't need a number 2 as my high priority. So without Darnell Mooney, obviously we still got to bring in some more receiver help, but that's not my priority. It's just not. So the other thing I'll say about that, which I alluded to already on the community, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not my top guy. I see it all the time. Again, imagine if we had Marvin Harrison Jr. with DJ Moore, what that offense could be, and Saquon Barkley, for some reason, everyone keeps saying that. Imagine what that could be. Well, and I'm not saying he's bad, but everyone's writing it off as he's the top prospect, which is fine, because any given year, top prospect could be whatever. But people are talking about him as he is a top 5 pick. He is the closest thing to a elite prospect like a Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss type that we've seen. And my evaluation, I don't see that. Again, I was going to get into the nitty gritty of this, but I'm really not. I don't think I need to right now. But at the end of the day, I don't think receiver is a necessity. But also, even if that was the case, Marvin Harrison Jr., at least the discussions about trading back and then getting Marvin Harrison Jr., and then picking again at 9 to get a whatever. I think that's rooted in the Justin Fields apologist. That's what I think, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is not good enough to pass up a quarterback. Caleb or anybody else. So if I trade back to 3 or 4 just so I could get Marvin, that's not happening. That's not happening. He's not that good of a prospect. So yeah, I've watched him, and I think again, my number one prospect right now is Odunze. I don't think that's going to change. And then Marvin's number 2. I think all of that, the top 3 are close with each other. At least the ones that I watched so far. But the thing is with Marvin, strong, natural strength, could be a great blocker. Shows ability to attack the ball, track the ball, ball skills. Hands seem pretty good, could catch away from the frame. Routes are pretty decent, but the biggest thing, again, getting into the weeds of football, the biggest thing for me is his hips are not super fluid, and people will watch him and say, what are you talking about? But there's a difference between being explosive off the plant, like the ability to plant and burst, stick your foot in the ground, explode off of it. And so if you do like the basketball dribble gather that a lot of receivers do, you could go 1-2 explode. That's different than being able to sink your hips, flip your hips. That's very different. And I don't think his hips are stiff necessarily, because you can see he's an explosive athlete. And again, being explosive doesn't mean you're fluid. Those are two different things. But he's an explosive athlete. He can do things across the middle. You see it. So it's not that they're stiff, but they're linear. And what that means is your hips are just used to going straight and backwards, like, one way, a line. Whereas someone fluid can open their hips from left to right, switch them, flip them, forward, back, stop, start. And so I just don't think he's as fluid as an athlete as I would have expected for someone that was being talked about as an elite prospect. That doesn't take away from a lot of the other stuff that he does. Again, very much a full package receiver, and not saying he's not going to be effective, not saying any of that. That's the tricky part about receivers now. As I told you, they're a dime a dozen, much like running backs. But the difference is there's just a lot of nuance based on the scheme. With a running back, whatever the scheme kind of is, the O-line giving you holes, you're going to be good. But with a receiver, obviously you need the quarterback, but depending on what they ask you to do, what type of routes you're running and stuff, there's going to be people that just are going to be effective in other areas versus others. So, for me, again, Marvin Harrison, he is a great prospect. Definitely top 2, top 3 in this draft so far, but he's not what people are talking about. And I guess my bigger point is any talk of trying to sacrifice stuff to get him, even if we pick Caleb Williams, and then people talking about sacrificing to move up to get him, that's not who I would move up to get. That's not who I move up to get. All right, last hot take. Luke Getsy was scapegoated. I told you before all year about this. We talked about this. But then once we got Shane Waldron, I talked about, again, people want to criticize the Getsy system, but then we went and got Shane Waldron from the same philosophy. And then there's now aftermath. We hear 9 candidates were interviewed. All of them, I think almost all of them, came from or are rooted in the Shanahan McVay philosophy. And so I think that just goes to show you once again that it's not necessarily the fit, because it's one thing to say Getsy can't teach or he can't adjust. I said that before. I acknowledge that. But people with this narrative that he tried to force Justin into his system and didn't make a system for Justin, how does it make sense then that everybody they talked to ran the same style? So clearly that is the style they wanted and they still want and believe works. It's not a question of, well, we gotta I don't care what you run. Come in here, talk to Justin Fields and figure out what to run. No, that wasn't the conversation. Conversation was, this is the style of offense that me as a head coach and me as a GM feel we want to run. And Getsy gets fired, and then they just go out and find somebody to do the same. And I said when Shane Waldron was hired, I said, well, what makes this any different if he gets Justin Fields? Like, he's not going to be able to do everything he did with Geno Smith or other people. He's going to have to change it up too. So I don't get the conversation. Like, if the conversation was Luke Getsy just did not know how to teach, this guy's a better teacher, and then okay. Or if Getsy don't know how to adjust, this guy's a better adjuster, okay. But that's not the conversation being had. One. Two, even if it was, how do y'all know that? You don't even have the evidence to make that. The only thing y'all can say is Getsy's system sucks. Shane Waldron's going to fix it, running the same system. And so I find that interesting. And then the other part that's outside of the Bears is that Luke Getsy's getting a bunch of interviews. Now, I don't know if he's going to be an OC somewhere. I don't know if he even gets hired. But to be fired and turn around and get multiple interviews tells you what? Much like the Chargers GM, there's a lot of things to a GM. So maybe he messed up somewhere and I don't know the ins and outs. But what I do know, because he's a big friend of the Pat McAfee show, he's on there. He's been on there quite a bit over the years. And so I've got to hear him talk about his thoughts, ideas, and all that. One thing I do know, even outside of that, just looking at the roster, he knows how to pick talent. It wasn't the talent issue. It was a coaching issue. And so he gets fired. Oh, you suck. We losing, so you're fired. Cool. Turn around, got a job. Why? Because people can recognize he still knows what he's doing. Getsy, again, gets fired. The staff didn't get let go. Pete Carroll, whatever, they parted ways, so the whole staff got let go. It wasn't that situation. Getsy, you got fired. The head coach got to stay. But yet people want to interview him and bring him in because there's a reason he was a big name coming out, and there's a reason people are still interested. And again, I am not defending Getsy in terms of I know and he was great and all that, but what I am saying is he was scapegoated 100%. So people want to have that argument. And I say it all the time, whether it's head coaches being fired in the middle of the season, whether it's a coordinator being fired or somebody bringing in a new coach at a different position. It's all fluff just for the fans. And you know how I know it's fluff? Because when I hear people talk about, and I mean media and fans, when I hear them talk about coaches in terms of like the Cowboys, for example, yeah, you won a division, you won all these games, but you lost again in the playoffs. So you have to do something. Some people even talking about the Lions. Yeah, he did a lot of great stuff, but he made such terrible choices that you have to fire. You have to. As an owner, you have to do it. If you don't do it, people won't think you're serious. You have to do something. Even if is the conversation ever, this is the right move? Is the conversation ever, this is the fix? No, the conversation is always, you just have to do something. And that's how I know it's fluff. So, guess he was scapegoated. I'm not going to sit here and say he was the biggest issue. I'm not going to say he was great, but he was scapegoated. The other part of that conversation, Eric Bieniemy. Remember how everybody told me he was going to be the head coach? Remember how everyone said he was the perfect fit for Justin or Caleb? Remember Ryan Poles is tight with Eric. He's going to bring him in. First of all, we're going to ignore the fact that the offense for the Commanders was terrible. And so in a world where having a good unit makes you a quality candidate for head coach, why does Eric Bieniemy get to be that? He didn't even get interviewed by the Bears out of 9 coordinators, which tells you again, that's not the system they're looking for. This ain't Kansas City don't run nothing like the Shanahan offense. That tells you that's not what they're looking for. But also, again, everybody wants to bring up how great it was and all that, and yet we sit here, we didn't interview him. Nobody interviewed him. And the offense looked terrible last year. So, again, another narrative that kind of gets dispelled as we kind of throw Luke Getsy under the bus. All right, so that's it. So we are going to we're going to go to the fan line. We got Big Mike wanted to share his thoughts on Caleb Williams. Here you go.
Yo, what up, boom or bust? Listen, man, everybody talking about Caleb Williams, generational talent. You know, he got this big arm. He can do all this stuff. And I've seen the highlights. I'm not a guy who breaks down tape, but the dude looked like he the truth. But the thing that I'm afraid of is his attitude, man. We don't know what kind of kid this is. We don't know how he is with his teammates. We don't know, he seems like he could be a prima donna and a diva. And, I'm afraid that could mess up the camaraderie that we have in the Bears locker room right now. I love Justin, but Justin does have to improve in some areas. So either way you look at it, man, if we go with Caleb, we got to worry about his attitude. And I think Ryan Poles and that staff is going to do their due diligence and make sure that they, check all those boxes. But if we stick with Justin, then we got to worry about is he going to be consistent. Listen, I just hope and pray that the Bears make the right decision. It don't matter to me. I'm a Bears fan, whether they go with Caleb or stick with Justin. I'm all for it. So, man, I'm just hoping these guys do what they need to do and we get the right QB in here so we can go ahead and start winning some titles, man, and competing in this league. Thank you. I'm out.
All right, so I don't disagree. I think that, as I mentioned before, the biggest part of the process is the part that I don't get to be a part of, none of you get to be a part of, and that's understanding the person, because these are people. And I know it sounds cliche to say it, but you really got to say it. Even I had to have my eyes open this year. Now knowing people in the NFL, you really have to remember these are just people. And so that part of evaluating who he is, and that's going to tell you what type of leader you got. It's going to tell you kind of how he responds in certain situations, what makes him comfortable, but also what's his capacity to grow. That's why I always say about prospects, you get a guy who loves the game, absolutely loves the game, loves to consume it. You get a guy that wants to grind and all that. You get an idea. That doesn't mean they'll make the choice to get better, but that gives you an idea of what is his ability to get better. And so as a quarterback, the leadership part is even more important, but those are the two things you kind of learn. And so I agree. As I mentioned, I think it was round 3 of our Caleb discussions. I said that's what's really been on my mind. Is this a guy that is going to to make it? And again, the play style and even this comment is not to say he's the same player, but you think of Johnny Manziel, really you can think of Jamarcus Russell too, and others. Like, you can have talent, but if you get into the league and you don't really care to get better, you don't care to be coached correctly, you're only here for the money, whatever it might be, that then will show up in your play and your development, especially at a position real hard like the quarterback. So you don't want to go down that road, because then you are talking about a bust. And so for me, that's a worry of mine too. But that's only a job that the front office can really do. I mean, we got a discussion now. I heard on the herd, where they were talking about him basically having back channel conversations to tell the Bears, look, trade the pick to Washington because that's where I want to go. I don't want to play for y'all. And there's people that back that thought process. It's not the first time it happened. I know some people talk about it like it is, but it's happened before. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think it's a real possibility that he might feel that way. So I don't think it's necessary unless you got like a owner that is legitimately, problematic. And really, there's only like a couple owners that I think are notably outstanding, or out at least publicly. I mean, they're out in the public. That's Jerry Jones, and he's not toxic necessarily, but he's a different type of owner. And then there's Tepper, who has been labeled as toxic. Most other owners, okay, I don't know that they're changing a pick's mind. So that's one thing. The Bears don't have an owner to scare you away. I'm sure Bears fans are going to talk crap about the owner, but in terms of public, like to the masses, that's not a factor. So then it becomes a conversation of, well, they haven't developed a quarterback. What about Matt Eberflus? Blah, blah, blah. I think that is such, I just don't agree with that. I know a lot of Bears fans feel that way, where it's like, we've never developed the quarterback. Yeah, like we had the same staff for 100 years. That's not how that works. It does not matter. It's not like, okay, we get a great coach and a great staff, but because we're the Bears, they all of a sudden don't know how to coach. That's not how that works. Everybody could feel snake bitten and bad luck, but the fact is the talent is what makes it different. So if you feel like you got a team that can develop them, then you make the move, and as a player, I mean, you just got to kind of take it. I don't think any team is like, yeah, we don't really have the tools to do this, so we're just going to sit this out. No. Everybody thinks they're building the right space, and it hits for a lot of reasons. And I don't think one of them is just because of who the team is necessarily. So yeah, but it's a possibility that he might feel that way from the outside looking in, and they might say we don't want to go to Chicago, and that'll be definitely interesting if that ends up happening. And to be honest, I do think there's a world where we could take a Jaden Daniels. Be honest with you. So anyway, that's it for me. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe. And remember, stay up and bear down.